A second ruling by the Supreme Court on Thursday sent a clear message that President Obama's powers are limited. The court unanimously ruled in NLRB versus Noel Canning the president violated the Constitution in 2012 by making recess appointments to the National Labor Relations Board while the Senate was on a brief break. In its opinion, which was written by Justice Stephen Breyer, the court concluded that when the appointments before us took place, the Senate was in the midst of a 3-day recess. 3 days is too short a time to bring a recess within the scope of the clause. Thus, we concluded the president lacked the power to make the recess appointments here at issue. Though the court put limits on the president's recess appointment powers in the short term, they still left open the possibility for recess appointments to be made during breaks of 10 days or more. So 10 days is a recess, 3 days is not. You wrote about this back when the appointments were made and said, hey, just write a letter. It will solve it. Tell me about that solution that wasn't taken.
See, because a lot of people think, oh, this is the president disregarding the Senate. In fact, and that's what Senator McConnell says, and the minority leader, but Obama probably had the support of a majority of the Senate. But there was the filibuster to deal with. He didn't have 60 senators. He had 51. So way back when, the day he did this, I said, Senator Reid, the majority leader, should sign a letter, get 50 other Democrats on board, saying, we support what the president did. The president here is not dissing the Senate. He's actually helping us do a kind of filibuster reform.
I love that idea because it reminds us that, in fact, the Senate is controlled by a majority of Democrats, and that in this case, this notion of the president versus the Senate is not really quite what happened. I want to talk about one other case that's coming up. That's Hobby Lobby. Any sense from our buffer zones case, from your perspective, Ren, about what we can expect in Hobby Lobby?
Well, these cases, I think, are intimately related in a lot of ways. For one thing, they both set up people who are conservative as the victims, as their rights being oppressed. And they, in fact, have overlapping attorneys. The attorney for Eleanor McCullen, Mark Rienzi, who argued the case at oral argument, he works for the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, which has brought most of the cases against the contraceptive coverage in the Affordable Care Act, which is what's at issue in the decision we're expecting on Monday. And this whole idea is using the First Amendment as a weapon to kind of erode different laws and regulations that have been passed to expand access to reproductive health care. So we'll see, perhaps, maybe the anonymity in McCullen was the sign. I don't know if this is the case, but perhaps it was the sign that there was some vote swapping, because Justice Roberts really likes unanimous decisions. He likes to look reasonable. Perhaps that will mean a less bad outcome for contraceptive access on Monday.
So as you bring up unanimity, I'm reminded that, of course, one of the people currently sitting on the court is Sonia Sotomayor, who, you know, I'm always looking for Sotomayor and the notorious RBG, Ginsburg, to scream out, no, not this. And so when Sotomayor joins in this decision, I started asking, is it about a kind of Catholic Latina conservatism? And you were saying earlier, no, that is not the way to think about it. So tell me that.
Yeah, like the majority of all women, the vast majority of women in this country, Latinas of all faiths use and support contraception. And 97% of sexually experienced Latinas have used a form of contraception in their life. And 90% of married Catholic Latinas have used a form of contraception that's banned by the Vatican. So this is something we need, that we use, and that the ACA was a big win for us when they included contraception as preventative care. So we are hopeful, and we really want to ensure that the Supreme Court rules in the favor of religious liberty of the women, of the families that can make decisions for themselves with their own moral agency, with their own faith, with their own conscience, not those of the CEOs at Hobby Lobby.
So you don't see Sotomayor as necessarily joining this as a result of some sort of base level identity politics, because we're probably getting the identity politics wrong. Let me ask just one more. I want to get you in on this, because I just want to underline one more time the point that gauntlet that will lead to either the screaming or to the sidewalk counseling is really about certain kinds of communities, certain kinds of women, those most marginalized, having to experience it.
Absolutely. More and more, I think, throughout our society, we're really seeing this doubling down on privilege. And when you have the Supreme Court has this enormous buffer zone for an entrance the justices don't actually even use, versus we can't get a measly 35 feet when you see, we've never had a Supreme Court justice murdered. We had one brought up on murder charges in the 1880s, but never killed. Meanwhile, we had 8 doctors, workers, providers, escorts killed since 1993. And so you have this history that says, look, to me, it's reasonable to say 35 lousy feet away. But, you know, these are folks who are going into a clinic to receive a stigmatized type of health care. They're women who don't have the private doctors that you were mentioning. It just exposes them in a way that people who do have more advantages in life don't, and that's fundamentally unjust to me.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for, if only they would read your pieces, they would avoid such terrible outcomes. Thank you to Erin Carmon and to Akil Reed Amar. Also, thank you to Jessica González-Rojas and to Michelle Kinsey Bruns. Coming up, using art as a kind of 35-foot buffer zone to fend off street harassment. But first, my letter of the week.